House voted to pass a bill restricting the president's war powers. That vote was 224 in favor and 194 against.
Joining us to discuss all things Iran is former National Security Council Chief of Staff Fred Fleitz. He's currently president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Fred, welcome back to the show. It's great
to have you, Fred.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So, Fred, take us a little bit on the inside of some an action like this based on your experience. What were some of the things that the president and them were considering in real time, both in the decision to do the strike and then after the Iranians struck back at our bases?
Well, I think what happened in Iraq is the president trying to balance his promise to keep the U.S. out of wars and not to start new ones with his responsibility to protect the lives of U.S. citizens. And I think he made a very difficult decision to take out Soleimani. Here's someone who's responsible for the death and maiming of thousands of Americans and Iraqis. Probably was behind the attack on the U.S. embassy in Baghdad and was planning more attacks. I think it was a difficult decision, but I think it was the right one. And the president is not planning on getting us into a war. He's going to continue the maximum pressure campaign, which has succeeded in undermining support for the Iranian regime, not just in Iran, but throughout the region. And when the Iranians are ready to talk, the president's available. Otherwise, he's going to keep the pressure up.
Unclear whether Iranians intended to kill any Americans with the strikes on our bases in Iraq. Had any Americans been killed in those attacks or even injured, do you think we'd be in a different place today in terms of escalation with Iran?
We would be, and that's a fascinating question because you know that Vice President Pence and senior military officials are claiming that there was an attempt to kill U.S. citizens. I don't agree. I think either this was probably an attack with missiles the Iranians knew would not strike the U.S. facilities. I think they didn't use their best missiles. Some people were saying they used very high-quality missiles, and they were aimed not to hit Americans. Either way, the Iranians did not want to escalate to a point that they would precipitate an overwhelming military response from the president. I think that's a good thing, and I'm hoping it means that the Iranians want to de-escalate.
So, Fred, also this morning, the Iraqi Prime Minister has called Secretary of State Pompeo and has requested that the United States begin to draw up plans to withdraw from Baghdad. Do you think that is what is the consequence of that decision, it seems? Do you think it's a good decision? How do you think that the president is going to proceed here as somebody who worked with him closely?
It's troubling to hear that, and I'm hoping that these negotiations will result in a U.S. presence remaining in Iraq until the Iraqi military is competent to maintain security in the country. But look, if the Iraqi government does not want us in Iraq, we shouldn't be in Iraq. A lot of Americans think it's time for us to get out of Iraq.
So I agree with that.
So I mean, if this is the way the Iraqi government wants to go, that's their decision. But my hope is we will find an arrangement to keep a U.S. military presence there until the time is right to pull U.S. troops out.
Yeah.
Democrats, very belatedly, in my personal view, voted on this War Powers Act resolution yesterday, hoping to constrain the president's power. Of course, it's going to go nowhere in the Senate, most likely, although there are a few senators, Rand Paul and Mike Lee in particular on the Republican side, who might be willing to consider it. What do you view as the appropriate role of Congress in terms of acts of war?
Well, there's been a dispute between Congress and the executive branch for decades over the War Powers Act and Congress's right to declare war, and it is a bipartisan debate, and this happens during Democratic administrations also.
Absolutely.
I think in this instance here, this was mostly a resolution passed against the president's policies. But look, there was some Republican support for it because there are Republicans who think there's constitutional issues here.
What did you make in particular of Mike Lee's criticism of the briefing? And specifically, he said, look, we couldn't even get answers if there was a decision to take out the supreme leader of Iran. We couldn't even get answers on whether Congress would be involved in that decision. Just weigh in. What is your view there? I mean, shouldn't Congress be consulted in what certainly would be considered by any measure an act of war of assassinating the leader of another country?
There's a wide variety of views in the Republican Party. I think that's a good thing. There's libertarians like Senator Paul and Senator Lee, and they have very strong opinions on this. And Matt Gaetz also voted for this for this resolution in the House. I think this debate is healthy. I don't think notification was appropriate when it concerned taking out Soleimani. First of all, this was an urgent matter that had to be done immediately. ultimately,
the supreme leader, which was the hypothetical that Lee and others tried to press with the briefers and couldn't get an answer on. What's your view there?
the sad reality now is that Trump derangement syndrome has poisoned the national security debate to such an extent that trust between the executive branch and the legislative branch has broken down, and the president feels he cannot trust senior leaders of Congress with sensitive intelligence. I hope we can fix that, but that's where we are right now.
But that shouldn't supersede the Constitution.
Right, or the gang of
The
eight,
Constitution
right?
doesn't require prior notification of actions like this.
Mm-hmm. So, Fred, just broadly and strategically, we're looking at this through that lens as somebody who supported the president, worked in the White House. Is this a natural consequence of what President Trump ran on? I mean, he has seized upon a desire of this country to not go to war. And do you think that this, I mean, has this strike fulfilled that promise? Do you think so? I mean, I know we're not at war right now. I mean, I guess maybe we are in a cold one. But, I mean, do you see this as a natural extension of his promises to get America out of these regions?
I think it's interesting to contrast the way the president responded to the attacks on U.S. troops with the calls on Fox News the night of the bombing by a number of people, including Senator Graham. Let's take out the nuclear facilities now.
Right.
Let's take out the oil facilities now.
Right.
Let's pulverize Iran. The president does not want to do that.
Yeah.
That's getting us into a war.
Yeah.
He wanted a proportionate response. He doesn't want to use military force unless necessary. He does not want to start a war from Iran. So yes, I think what we're seeing here is consistent with his approach to national security, his America First approach to national security.
So what happens now? Are the Iranians, are they done? Is that it? Are we done? What is the current status? And what do you see as the ultimate goal of this administration? Is the goal ultimately regime change? Is it negotiations? What do they want here?
Well, it is not regime change. The president has made that clear. I would like to think the Iranians are prepared to ratchet down and de-escalate. I don't think that's likely, unfortunately. I think they'll probably use their terrorist groups and proxies to commit acts of terror against Americans, soldiers worldwide. I heard someone say American ambassadors should be careful when they start their cars in the morning in certain cities because of the risk of terrorist attacks.
Horrible.
The president's goal was to get out of the nuclear deal. You and I disagree on this. I think it was a terrible deal. And to put pressure on Iran until it is ready to negotiate. In the meantime, he's lowering support for this regime, denying them access to military technology, to technology they can use for missiles and nuclear weapons. And hopefully they will come around and do the right thing. I don't see that in the immediate future, but this is a complicated question, and there's no easy answer.
So my worry on that, Fred, is that we could repeat kind of a Japan 1930 situation where just the sheer amount of economic pressure on the regime leads them to the calculation that they have no choice but to retaliate against the United States militarily. What is the off-ramp there that exists to make sure we avoid that?
I think there's another possibility. I think this is an opportunity for some creative diplomacy, going to the French, the British, and the Russians to weigh in with the Iranians, to say there's another way. You don't have to resort to terrorism and violence. Trump is serious about this. If you want to have your country destroyed, keep going down the road that you want. I think that the president has tried to keep the door open to good relations with Russia. I know that's controversial. Maybe this is an opportunity to find another country the Iranians might listen to see if there's a way to truly de-escalate.
Yeah.
And the public opinion polling that we've seen, I believe, from Morning Consult is kind of interesting because on the one hand, a plurality of Americans supported the president's strike on Soleimani. On the other hand, quite a large majority say they feel less safe today. How do you reconcile those two views? And what would you say to reassure Americans who say, you know, I feel more at risk, I feel more vulnerable, I feel that our people have been put at risk by these actions?
Well, the situation in Iraq is very dangerous right now. I think Americans are genuinely worried about it. I don't think the reporting about what happened has been accurate in most of the mainstream media. I think statements by Democrats have been irresponsible about the decision to take out Soleimani. I wish all Americans would read Joe Lieberman's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal the day after the attack to say, we Democrats have to put politics aside, admit that this was an evil man, and taking him out was a good thing. And I wish we would return to the days when politics would end at water's edge and we would support a president at a time of a crisis like this.
We should just say, though, that this isn't just Democrats who've been critical. Right. I mean, some of the reporting is that Tucker Carlson on Fox News was very influential in getting the president to sort of pull back from the edge here. So you can't just say that it's only Democrats who have been critical. I mean, Sagar's had questions as well, and he's not a Democrat either.
I think it's about.
So I think there's valid concerns
strategy
here
versus that. I mean, I have no sympathy for Qasem Soleimani, but it's about the strategic implications of taking out bad guys. I mean, as somebody, you've been around here for a long time, Fred. You saw what happened in the aftermath of Iraq. Do you share some of those concerns about the possible strategic fallout from things like this?
I think Tucker Carlson's an outlier. I don't think he represents the Republican Party or conservatives. But I think we do have to give consideration to the aftermath of this and how we'll handle the situation with, Iraq possibly asking us to remove our troops from the area. But I also say there's no easy answer to this. Bombing Iraq and blowing it to smithereens is not the answer, even though a lot of my fellow Republicans think it is. Rejoining
Iran, you mean?
I'm sorry, rejoining Iran.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I don't want us to bomb Iraq either.
Not again.
And look, trying to sign a deal, any deal, like the Obama administration did, just to say we have a deal with Iran, that's not the answer either.
All right. Well, Fred, thank you so much for joining us.
We appreciate your perspective. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
So we're going to discuss the Ukrainian plane crash with former Director of Government, Public and Family Affairs for the NTSB, Jamie Finch. That is next.